Hi, I'm Bruce Lourie, president of the Ivy Foundation. The world is in the midst of a great techno-cultural transition. We're facing the increasing effects of climate change on human infrastructure and on humanity. We're in the midst of decarbonizing our economy, and we're looking at new ways to finance this transition. The question that we're facing globally is, where do we see ourselves in this transition? And in particular in Canada, we're trying to see, as a country dependent on fossil fuels, how best can we manage ourselves through this complex, low-carbon energy transition, one of the great wicked problems that we're facing.
Canada, the second largest country in the world, home to 36 million people. Most live in cities close to the American border. The economy is based on natural resources and the service industry. It has one of the best standards of living in the world. Canada is also one of the most vulnerable nations to climate change. The area at greatest risk is in the north, above the permafrost line. Greenhouse gases are melting Arctic ice at an unprecedented rate. This endangers wildlife and the people who rely on the land for food.
Climate change is accelerated in the north. It's more noticeable in the north.
Warming temperatures are melting the permafrost for the first time in 10,000 years. Massive amounts of methane are being released into the atmosphere. As the north melts, the world feels the effects. Rising oceans and more greenhouse gases.
The political and public dialogue is becoming more polarized, more conflicted, more divisive. And I don't think that's a recipe for moving a constructive environmental or economic agenda forward.
Most human beings I come across, they seem to believe that there's not really an alternative to doing the things they do the way they do them. So they'll say, well, I can't drive at a different time. I can't heat my house differently. I can't produce steel differently.
In 2015, a new government was elected with an interest in change.
Together, we're creating a plan that will help us meet or exceed our emissions targets and encourage clean economic growth.
Canada really has gone from like a global laggard on the climate file to a global leader on the climate file.
These are difficult decisions. As a result of that, they're tough for governments to make without some sense that there's broader public support and a diversity of interests who are prepared to stand up and support them.
So we're in a situation where people are still clinging to, I know I have to change what I don't want to, and we need to help them switch to, there's some real advantages about changing. Let's get on with it.
So social finance is the use of different forms of capital to achieve social change. So it encompasses everything from investing in businesses that have some kind of social impact to venture philanthropy styles of grant making. So not necessarily your traditional grant making, but really trying to take the principles of what makes for successful business and try to apply that to the world of philanthropy.
But what we're talking about here with the social finance perspective on these issues is about scaffolding up new systems. So alternatives, investing in alternatives.
I'd like to see ourselves as catalysts. We looked at Canada's likely pathways to net zero by 2050. How would we get there? And what would that mean for the building trades? And the short answer is that it means an enormous number of jobs for the building trades. They crunched out to 4 million direct jobs between now and 2050. If you apply the multiplier factor for induced, indirect, and supply chain, we're looking at 20 million jobs. It's a huge number of jobs. We're very, very pleased with this work. It's pivotal because it represents the time when people with hard hats are now saying, what can I do? And they're now saying, maybe there's jobs beyond pipelines. That's the power of this piece, is the ability to have that kind of conversation.
Historically, what we've learned from some of the work in philanthropy and movements is the idea that we're building a movement, but it's a movement of people who all look like us and talk like us and think like us. And that's not actually the movement that we need. We need a movement that has people who don't look like us, who don't think like us, who maybe don't even like us, but they gotta be there.
In the reconciliation space, what we really look to do is to provide supports to Indigenous communities who are doing the work that they believe is most important. And so we've shied away from saying we are going to do work in housing or in education, or that's not the approach that we take. The approach that we take is that communities know what is most pressing in their communities.
Aki Energy is an interesting case. It's an Indigenous-owned company that is doing the work of installing renewable power systems for remote off-grid communities that are currently dependent on diesel. That diesel is either trucked in over the winter on what are called winter roads, or it's flown in small planes and very, very expensive. What Aki does is it goes in, does an assessment on what renewables would work, whether it's geothermal, solar, wind, run-of-the-river hydro, designs that solution with the community's involvement, hires local people to do that work, creates training, employment opportunities these are well-paid jobs. It's now hitting a ceiling because it can't operate outside of the province of Manitoba where it's been working because of various regulatory challenges. How do we navigate this in a way that not only solves the problem for Aki, but creates an equitable and accessible marketplace for scaling up not just Aki's work, but similar work across the country?
Over the past 5 years, the Ivy Foundation has set out to rethink and retool Canada's response to climate change. At the center of this work has been building new collaboratives, new institutions, and most critically, working across the political divide to try to tackle the complex issue of climate change. The question that we have is, how can philanthropy and sustainable finance work in coordination to help countries like Canada and others tackle this wicked problem?